Howdy, Jacob here. Today we're looking at DRD Gold, ticker symbol DRD. Let's get into looking at some of the financials. So, market cap of 775 million, enterprise value of 644 million. So, more uh, essentially cash equivalent on hand, net of debt. Metals and mining company. Looks like they're a gold mining company that engages in surface gold tailings in South Africa. Okay. So 11.3 PE initially, from that perspective, looking pretty cheap. If you look at their financials, jumped from 169 million in 2014 to 293 million in 2023 due to there seems to be an acquisition between 2019 and 2020 that you can see from the business just changing immensely. Pretty consistent, maybe averaging about 7% outside of 2017 to upwards of 30, and then about 4% upwards of in the low 20s. So big change in the actual business. We can see that their return on investment jumped from 4% to 20%. We'll see if they actually use any of that to reinvest into themselves. So their current 5.06% dividend yield pays out 27 million, which is exactly what their free cash flow was last year. But in the last 3 years since the acquisition, 55 million, 85 million, 59 million. So it feels like they can afford this fairly well. Let's see on the balance sheet. Yeah, I feel like they can afford this because their debt is only 100 million and they have 131 in cash. So they really don't have to issue debt, and looks like they haven't issued debt, wow, in the last 10 years. Um, so they don't have to issue debt to pay for these dividends, even if it's a down year. Um, Even if the cyclicality or the negativity picks up with them because they have so much cash on hand. And so even if there were a year where they produce zero, maybe the next they do 50, which would offset it. But in that year alone, they wouldn't have to issue debt to pay for these dividends. They would just dig into the 131 million in cash that they have right now. So let's start making some assumptions here. So I might just assume, um, but since the acquisition jumped up negative over here, but then positive over a 3 year period. I mean, and it's not looking like they're reinvesting. I mean, they have 2 million investing themselves, so um, it's just not a long history of how the business is. So this would definitely be something I would want to dig into if the price felt attractive. But as for the 45 cents dividend, I'm fine keeping that the same. They can afford it, but I don't see a reason to raise it since it should be based on their cash flow. It shouldn't necessarily be based on their balance sheet. Their balance sheet is just the safe haven of being able to afford the dividend as it is. So um, I might do 2%, so a little below inflation, and then um, maybe 13, because I mean, at that time maybe there's not a lot of growth ahead of them, but the balance sheet is good enough to where if they want to pay for reinvesting back into themselves, they definitely can. Making acquisitions, don't always recommend that since usually they overpay for them, but um, that's definitely a possibility. And then as for margins go, I know gold prices have been very high recently, so that could be part of the reason their margins have been higher. But um, I think we can assume maybe 20 and 16, and then share change just 1%. because they don't. Stock-based compensation is pretty much nothing. Common stock. So outside of this acquisition, I presume 0.05. All right. So with these assumptions, I get a price of $5.01 to get a 15% return on the stock, which would require the company's stock to fall 44%. I mean, it's a gold company. Um, Dividend is very solid, so if you're looking for that consistent dividend, I think this can provide you with that. To me, I'm just going to be waiting on it, but this is definitely a company that I think a lot of people should look more into, or not look more into just yet, but look more into by adding it to your screener to view later when it gets to a price that's attractive to you after you do your present value calculation. And then definitely something to look more into once it does start looking more attractive. So thank you and have a good